since we met you people 500 years ago, look at us. We've given everything. You are still taking. It's true. I mean, where will the whole Western world be without Africa? Our cocoa, our timber, our gold, our diamonds, our platinum, our whatever. Everything you are is us. I am not saying it, it's a fact. And in return for all of this, what have we got? Nothing. Anti-personnel indoctrination against ourselves. If you go and cook your horrible diseases like AIDS, you say it is us. You brought us tuberculosis. We didn't have this big cough until white people came here. In exchange for Africa giving Europe 500 solid years of our people, I mean not Europe, the Western world, of our human beings to work your canes, to dig your gold, to take in gold itself, diamond, I mean, you know, fish, peanuts, palm oil, everything. In exchange for that, we have got nothing. Nothing. And you know it. Nothing. And you look upon, white folks look upon us like monkeys. It is true. It's in your literature. Hey, some of your best thinkers have said this about us. Have you heard of all these Germans? Have you heard?
Okay.
Yes. They said, Lord Burton, yes. People like that, they said, we don't even have the brain of animals. That's what we've got from you people.
But don't you think that this is over now?
Over where? Is it over? Who said that AIDS came from the green monkey? Is it over? Is it over?
Well, if this is your impression, do you think that you can ever forgive us?
It's not a question of forgiveness. I have nothing against you. My point is that you did and you are doing for your survival what is necessary. We can't blame you for that. The fact that we didn't do enough for our own survival and we are still not doing enough for our survival, that is not your problem. Even everybody that God has created has a sense of survival, and if we don't develop it, we can't blame white people. You came here because you needed these things. You took gunpowder from the Chinese. You needed them.
Nearly 6 decades after Kwame Nkrumah penned his seminal work, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism in 1965, the prescient warnings of Ghana's first president resonate with startling accuracy across contemporary Africa. Written at the height of African decolonization, Nkrumah's analysis exposed the sophisticated mechanisms through which former colonial powers and emerging global superpowers maintained their stranglehold over African resources and political autonomy. Today, as we witness the Democratic Republic of Congo's mineral wealth fueling global technology, while its people remain impoverished, France's continued monetary control over 14 African nations through the CFA Frank system, and China's debt trap diplomacy reshaping the continent's economic landscape. Nkrumah's insights prove not merely historical, but prophetic. This critical examination explores how Nkrumah's theoretical framework illuminates the persistent patterns of African subjugation in the 21st century. By analyzing the core arguments of his groundbreaking work alongside contemporary examples of neocolonial exploitation, we can understand how the fundamental structures of domination have evolved while maintaining their essential character. The book's central thesis, that neocolonialism represents imperialism in its final and perhaps its most dangerous stage, demands urgent reconsideration as Africa continues to struggle with the paradox of resource abundance amid widespread poverty. Kwame Nkrumah's definition of neocolonialism remains one of the most precise and enduring formulations of this phenomenon. In his own words, the essence of neocolonialism is that the state, which is subject to it is, in theory, independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside. This definition captures the fundamental deception at the heart of neocolonial relationships, the maintenance of formal independence while ensuring substantive dependence. Nkrumah identified several key mechanisms through which neocolonial control operates. Economic control manifests through the obligation of former colonies to purchase manufactured products exclusively from the imperial power, creating captive markets that perpetuate dependency. Monetary control operates through banking systems imposed by the imperial power, allowing external manipulation of foreign exchange and financial policy. Administrative control involves the placement of civil servants in key positions where they can dictate policy, ensuring that local governance serves external interests. In extreme cases, military control through the garrisoning of troops provides direct oversight of government operations. The Ghanaian leader's analysis was particularly insightful in recognizing that neocolonial control need not be exercised by the former colonial power. He cited South Vietnam, where France was the former imperial power, but the United States assumed neocolonial control, and the Congo, where great international financial concerns exercise control through a consortium of interests not specifically identifiable with any particular state. This observation proves remarkably prescient in understanding contemporary African affairs, where Chinese corporations, European multinational companies, and American financial institutions compete for influence across the continent. Nkrumah argued that neocolonialism represents the worst form of imperialism, because for those who practice it, it means power without responsibility, and for those who suffer from it, it means exploitation without redress. Unlike traditional colonialism, where the imperial power had to justify its actions domestically and provide some protection to local collaborators, neocolonialism operates through plausible deniability and the fiction of sovereign equality. Perhaps no contemporary example better illustrates Nkrumah's analysis than France's continued monetary control over 14 African nations through the CFA Frank system. This mechanism embodies precisely what Nkrumah described as monetary control over foreign exchange through the imposition of a banking system controlled by the imperial power. The CFA Frank, originally established during the colonial period, continues to function according to the same principles and purposes established during direct colonial rule. The system operates through two monetary unions: the West African Economic and Monetary Union, WAMU, comprising Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo, and the Central African Economic and Monetary Union, CEMAC, including Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Congo-Brazzaville, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon. Both currencies are pegged to the euro and managed by central banks, whose operations are overseen by the French Treasury. The most striking aspect of this arrangement is the reserve requirement that forces these nations to deposit a significant portion of their foreign exchange reserves in the French Treasury. Originally set at 70% of reserves, this requirement was reduced to 30% in 2005, following sustained criticism, but the fundamental structure of dependency remains intact. This mechanism ensures that France maintains effective control over the monetary policies of these nations, while benefiting from the use of their reserves to support French economic interests. The economic impact of this system validates Nkrumah's prediction that investment under neocolonialism increases rather than decreases the gap between the rich and the poor countries of the world. Countries using the CFA Frank experience suppressed economic growth due to the euro peg, which makes their exports uncompetitive in global markets, while making imports from Europe artificially cheap. This creates a structural trade imbalance that perpetuates dependency on European manufactured goods, while hindering the development of local industries. The political dimensions of French neocolonialism extend beyond monetary control to encompass what Nkrumah identified as administrative and military mechanisms. France has intervened militarily in African affairs over 50 times since 1960, consistently supporting leaders who maintain favorable relationships with French interests. The recent military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, accompanied by popular demonstrations against French influence, represent a growing rejection of this neo-colonial arrangement. Protesters carrying signs reading "La France doit partir," France must leave, echo Nkrumah's call for genuine independence from external control. While Nkrumah could not have anticipated China's rise as a global power, his analysis of neo-colonial mechanisms proves remarkably applicable to understanding Chinese engagement with Africa. China's approach through the Belt and Road Initiative and massive infrastructure investments represents what Nkrumah described as control exercised by a consortium of financial interests, which are not specifically identifiable with any particular state, though in this case, the interests are clearly linked to Chinese state capitalism. Chinese loans to Africa, estimated at over $170 billion between 2000 and 2023, follow patterns that Nkrumah identified as characteristic of neocolonial exploitation. These loans typically finance infrastructure projects using Chinese companies, Chinese workers, and Chinese materials, ensuring that the majority of the loan value returns to China, while the recipient country assumes the debt burden. This arrangement exemplifies Nkrumah's observation that foreign capital is used for the exploitation rather than for the development of the less developed parts of the world. The debt trap diplomacy phenomenon, where countries struggle to repay Chinese loans and face pressure to grant strategic concessions, mirrors Nkrumah's warning about the loss of sovereignty under neocolonial arrangements. Countries like Zambia and Djibouti face potential loss of control over critical infrastructure due to their inability to service Chinese debt. The opacity of loan terms and the inclusion of clauses preventing collective debt restructuring echo the stringent payback requirements that Nkrumah identified as tools of neo-colonial control. However, the Chinese model also reveals the complexity of contemporary neocolonialism. Unlike the French system, which maintains direct monetary control, Chinese influence operates through debt relationships and infrastructure dependency. African leaders often view Chinese investment as preferable to Western alternatives because it comes with fewer explicit political conditions and provides tangible infrastructure development. This reflects what Nkrumah called the agency of African states in choosing their external relationships, even within constrained circumstances. The environmental and social costs of Chinese finance projects validate Nkrumah's concern about exploitation without redress. Mining operations and infrastructure projects often cause pollution, deforestation, and displacement of local communities. While the benefits flow primarily to Chinese companies and African political elites, the concentration of Chinese investment in extractive industries, particularly minerals essential for renewable energy technology, demonstrates how contemporary neocolonialism adapts to new global economic priorities while maintaining extractive relationships. The Democratic Republic of Congo provides perhaps the most stark contemporary example of what Nkrumah described as the use of African resources to develop and enrich other countries, rather than the developing countries in which these resources are found. The DRC possesses vast reserves of cobalt, lithium, copper, and other minerals essential for modern technology, particularly batteries for electric vehicles and renewable energy storage. Yet this mineral wealth has translated into one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, with over 7.1 million internally displaced people and widespread poverty. The extraction of these resources follows patterns that Nkrumah identified in his analysis of colonial economic structures. Multinational corporations, both Western and Chinese, extract raw materials that are then processed and manufactured into finished products in developed countries. The value addition occurs outside Africa, while African countries receive minimal compensation for their raw materials. This arrangement perpetuates what Nkrumah called the paradox of Africa, a continent rich in resources but poor in development outcomes. The human cost of this extraction validates Nkrumah's observation that under neocolonialism, Africans have been sacrificed as natural resources are valued, and not the lives of the African people. In the DRC's mining regions, children work in dangerous conditions, extracting cobalt for smartphone batteries, while women and disabled people labor in mines without health and safety protections. The displacement of over 358,000 people in 2024 alone, due to mining practices and related conflicts, demonstrates how resource extraction continues to prioritize profit over human welfare. The financial flows associated with resource extraction confirm Nkrumah's analysis of wealth transfer from Africa to developed countries. Research indicates that while African countries received approximately 19 billion in aid, 68 billion was extracted from the continent through deliberate misreporting of import and export values by multinational companies seeking to reduce their tax obligations. This represents a net outflow of 49 billion, not including the 32 billion in profits repatriated by multinational companies operating on the continent. The opacity surrounding these financial flows reflects what Nkrumah identified as the lack of accountability in neocolonial relationships. Unlike colonial arrangements, where imperial powers had to justify their actions domestically, contemporary resource extraction operates through complex networks of subsidiaries, shell companies, and cross-investments that obscure responsibility and prevent effective oversight. The same individuals often sit on multiple corporate boards, creating what Nkrumah described as a relatively small number of people who control vast African wealth. Nkrumah's analysis proves remarkably prescient in understanding how neocolonial mechanisms adapt to technological and economic changes while maintaining their essential character. The digital revolution has created new forms of dependency that echo his warnings about technological subjugation. African countries increasingly rely on foreign technology platforms, digital infrastructure, and data systems controlled by multinational corporations based in developed countries. The emergence of digital colonialism represents a contemporary manifestation of what Nkrumah described as control through the provision of civil servants in positions where they can dictate policy. Today, this control operates through the dominance of foreign technology companies in critical digital infrastructure. African governments and businesses depend on platforms controlled by American, Chinese, and European corporations for everything from mobile payments to government services, creating new forms of technological dependency. The extractive nature of digital colonialism mirrors traditional resource extraction patterns that Nkrumah identified. African user data is harvested by foreign technology companies and processed into valuable insights and targeted advertising revenue that flows back to developed countries. This represents a new form of what Nkrumah called the export of raw materials, in this case, raw data, for processing and value addition elsewhere. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed the vulnerability of African countries to external control over essential technologies and medical supplies. The concentration of pharmaceutical manufacturing in developed countries, combined with intellectual property regimes that prevent local production of essential medicines, demonstrates how contemporary neocolonialism operates through technological and legal mechanisms rather than direct political control. The growing resistance to neocolonial arrangements across Africa validates Nkrumah's belief in the ultimate unsustainability of these systems. The wave of military coups in West Africa, accompanied by popular demonstrations against French influence, represents a rejection of neocolonial arrangements that echoes Nkrumah's call for genuine independence. The expulsion of French forces from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger demonstrates that neocolonial control faces increasing challenges from popular movements demanding sovereignty. The emergence of alternative partnerships, particularly with Russia and other non-Western powers, reflects what Nkrumah advocated as non-alignment and diversification of external relationships. While these new partnerships may create different forms of dependency, they represent attempts to escape the constraints of traditional neocolonial arrangements. The establishment of the Wagner Group, and later the Africa Corps, in several African countries, demonstrates how geopolitical competition can create opportunities for African states to leverage competing interests. Economic integration initiatives across Africa, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, represent contemporary manifestations of Nkrumah's vision of Pan-African unity as a counter to neocolonial fragmentation. By creating larger economic units and reducing dependency on external markets. These initiatives address Nkrumah's concern that small states remain vulnerable to external manipulation through limited wars and economic pressure. The growth of African-led financial institutions and payment systems challenges the monetary control mechanisms that Nkrumah identified as central to neo-colonial exploitation. Mobile money systems like M-Pesa in Kenya and efforts to develop pan-African payment platforms represent attempts to reduce dependency on foreign-controlled financial systems. The proposed eco-currency for West Africa, while facing skepticism about its ultimate independence from French control, reflects growing awareness of the need for monetary sovereignty. However, these resistance movements also face the structural constraints that Nkrumah identified as inherent to neocolonial systems. The interconnected nature of global finance, technology, and trade creates multiple pressure points through which external powers can maintain influence even when direct control is challenged. The complexity of contemporary global systems makes it difficult to achieve the complete independence that Nkrumah advocated. Nkrumah's proposed solutions to neocolonialism remain remarkably relevant to contemporary African challenges. His advocacy for Pan-African unity as the primary counter to neocolonial fragmentation finds expression in current continental integration efforts. The African Union's Agenda 2063, which envisions a politically and economically integrated Africa, directly reflects Nkrumah's belief that only through unity can the former colonies challenge the imperial powers. The principle of non-alignment that Nkrumah advocated, cooperation with all states, whether they be capitalist, socialist, or have a mixed economy, provides a framework for understanding contemporary African diplomatic strategies. Countries like Ethiopia and Rwanda have successfully leveraged relationships with multiple external powers to maintain greater autonomy than would be possible through exclusive partnerships with single powers. Nkrumah's emphasis on national planning and state control over foreign investment offers insights for contemporary debates about economic sovereignty. His argument that foreign investment must be invested in accordance with a national plan drawn up by the government of the non-aligned state with its own interests in mind provides a framework for evaluating current investment relationships. Countries that have maintained stronger state capacity and clearer development strategies have generally achieved better outcomes from foreign investment. The concept of class solidarity that Nkrumah advocated, recognizing that capitalists are also exploiting the working class people in Western countries, remains relevant to understanding contemporary global inequality. The concentration of wealth among global elites, while both African and Western working classes face economic insecurity, suggests that the fundamental dynamics Nkrumah identified persist in new forms. However, implementing Nkrumah's solutions faces significant contemporary challenges. The persistence of patterns that Nkrumah identified 6 decades ago demonstrates the enduring relevance of his analysis. The fundamental structure of neocolonial relationships, formal independence combined with substantive dependency, continues to characterize Africa's relationship with global powers. Whether through French monetary control, Chinese debt diplomacy, or Western corporate dominance, the mechanisms of external control have evolved while maintaining their essential character. Nkrumah's prediction that neocolonialism would prove unsustainable appears increasingly prescient as resistance movements gain momentum across the continent. The growing rejection of traditional neocolonial arrangements, combined with the emergence of alternative partnerships and continental integration initiatives, suggests that the system he critiqued faces fundamental challenges. However, the adaptation of neocolonial mechanisms to new technologies and global systems demonstrates their resilience and capacity for evolution. Digital colonialism, climate-related resource extraction, and complex financial arrangements create new forms of dependency that require updated analysis and resistance strategies. The ultimate test of Nkrumah's analysis lies in whether African countries can achieve the genuine independence he advocated while participating in an interconnected global economy. The tension between integration and autonomy that he identified remains central to contemporary African development challenges.